The termination letter was 1 page. I had expected 2, maybe 3. The legal language alone usually requires a certain volume, and the HR department at Calloway Brands had always been thorough about documentation. 1 page felt almost insulting in the specific way that a dismissal delivered without ceremony insults not the fact of the ending, but the length of what preceded it. 7 years. 7 years of work that I could point to. Campaigns that had moved metrics, that had moved revenue, that had justified 4 consecutive years of above-target bonuses, that had, in a sense, funded the very building we were sitting in on a Tuesday afternoon in September, while my soon-to-be former boss handed me a single page and watched me read it. Her name was Diane Collier. She was 53 years old, Senior Vice President of Marketing, 17 years with the company, and possessed of the particular professional authority of someone who has survived enough corporate reorganizations to have stopped believing that anyone in the building is permanent, including, apparently, the people whose work had built the numbers that kept her own position defensible. She had decided, in the restructuring that had been announced 6 weeks ago, and finalized in the past 2 weeks, that my position was redundant. The new structure doesn't have a place for your role, she said. This is a business decision. It's not personal. It is always personal when someone says it is not personal. I looked at the letter. I looked at Diane. Okay, I said. She had expected more than that. I could see it, the slight recalibration of a woman prepared for a difficult conversation and finding instead a quiet one. She had her talking points assembled. She had her HR representative positioned near the door. She had her expression arranged into the practiced sympathy of someone performing a task they find uncomfortable but necessary. I gave her none of the difficult conversation. I'll collect my things, I said. How long do I have? We'd prefer today, she said. Then I'll do it today, I said. I stood up, I picked up the letter, and I walked out of her office into the hallway of the building that, through the holding company I had established 4 years earlier, I owned. My name is Reese Callahan. I am 36 years old, and the woman who just handed me a termination letter had been writing her department's lease checks to my holding company for 41 months. I need to explain how a person ends up owning the building they work in without anyone knowing. It is less complicated than it sounds and more deliberate than it appears. I had started in commercial real estate at 22, not as an investor, but as an analyst at a property management firm, learning the vocabulary and the mechanics of an industry that I found, from the first week, genuinely fascinating. The intersection of finance, architecture, urban dynamics, and the long game of patient capital had engaged something in me that the marketing career I was simultaneously building, nights and weekends, the way people build second things, when the first thing isn't enough, could not quite reach. For 6 years I had run both tracks simultaneously. The marketing career had moved faster, which was the nature of marketing careers. Visible output, measurable results, the kind of progress that arrives in titles and compensation adjustments. By 30, I was a director. By 32, a senior director. By 34, I was the person Diane Collier considered her most productive direct report, and whose work she presented to the executive team with the possessive ease of a manager who has learned to accept credit with dignity. The real estate track had moved slower, which was the nature of real estate investment, patient capital, compounding positions, the kind of progress that does not announce itself. My first acquisition had been a small, mixed-use building in the neighborhood where I had grown up, purchased at 30 with the accumulated capital of 8 years of aggressive saving and the proceeds of a refinanced property that my grandmother had left me, restructured into an investment I could use as collateral for the commercial loan. that made the acquisition possible. By 34, I had 4 properties across 2 cities. The 5th acquisition had required more capital than I had available through my existing structure. I had brought in a silent partner, a woman named Grace Yoon, a former colleague from the property management firm, who had become one of my most trusted professional relationships. And together, we had structured the acquisition of a 6-story commercial building in Midtown that had been underperforming under its previous owner due to a combination of deferred maintenance and tenant mix problems. I had identified during a due diligence process that I had conducted, necessarily, in my personal time, the building that Calloway Brands occupied on floors 2 through 4. I had acquired it 23 months before Diane Collier's termination letter. I had known, from the tenant records I had reviewed during due diligence, that my employer was in the building. The holding company structure, a Delaware LLC registered under a name that contained nothing identifying, meant that the connection between Calloway Brands' landlord and one of Calloway Brands' senior employees was not visible in any document that anyone at the company would routinely encounter. I had kept the tracks separate the way I had always kept them separate. Professionally, deliberately, with the understanding that the separation protected both. Then Diane handed me one page and told me today, and the separation became something else entirely. I spent 2 hours collecting 7 years of professional presence from my desk. The process of reducing a career to the contents of a cardboard box has a specific quality that I had witnessed other people navigate and was now navigating myself. The particular compression of it, the way objects that felt significant in context become simply objects when lifted out of it. My assistant Priya came by twice, the first time with a box, the second time, 20 minutes later, with another box and the expression of someone who had something to say and was deciding whether the moment was right. "For what it's worth," she said on the second pass. "Everyone knows." "Knows what?" I said. "That it's wrong," she said. "That the numbers you're responsible for are the numbers she uses in every executive presentation. That this restructuring is," she stopped. "Everyone knows. I just wanted you to know that everyone knows." "Thank you, Priya," I said. "What are you going to do?" she said. I looked around my office. The desk, the view, the specific quality of afternoon light through the windows that I had noticed. On my first day in this building, with the split attention of someone simultaneously occupying it as an employee and understanding it as a property. "I'm going to figure out my next thing," I said. "That's all." She nodded. She hugged me briefly, with the specific warmth of someone who doesn't know what else to offer and has decided that warmth is sufficient. She left. I sealed the second box. I was in the elevator with both boxes when my phone rang. Grace Yoon. "I heard," Grace said when I answered. She had sources. Grace always had sources. A network built over 20 years in commercial property that functioned with the efficiency of a well-maintained intelligence operation. "When did it happen?" "About 2 hours ago," I said. And I'm in the elevator with 2 boxes," I said. "So, it happened today, as requested." A brief silence. "The lease," Grace said, the word carrying everything that needed to be said. "I know," I said. "Their lease renewal is in 11 weeks, I said. "I know, Reese." Her voice had the specific tone she used when she was choosing her words with unusual care. "What do you want to do?" The elevator opened at the lobby. I walked through the building I owned, with 2 boxes of my former professional life, and stood on the sidewalk outside and looked up at the 6 floors of glass and steel and thought about what I wanted to do. "Handle it correctly," I said finally. "The way we handle everything. What does correctly look like in this case?" "Market rate," I said. "Standard terms. No games." A pause. "But I'm handling the renewal conversation personally." Grace was quiet for a moment. I'll send them the meeting request under your name, she said. Yes, I said. Do that. The meeting request went out the following morning. From Callahan-Yoon Property Partners, the management entity through which we handled tenant relations for the building, to Calloway Brands' office manager, and, as standard practice for lease renewals of this size, their SVP of Operations. The SVP of Operations' response came within the hour. Confirmed, 2 weeks out, would include their real estate committee. 3 days later, a second response came, a forwarded message from the SVP to Diane Collier, flagging the lease renewal meeting and asking whether she wanted to be included given the marketing department's occupancy on floor 3. Diane's response, also forwarded. Yes, include me. Grace sent me the thread with a single line. She's coming. I sent back. I know. The meeting was held in the building's second-floor conference room, a space I had renovated as part of the acquisition's capital improvement plan, replacing the previous owner's dated finishes with the clean, well-lit environment that I had understood. From years of experience on both sides of a professional relationship, was the kind of space that made people feel they were dealing with someone who had standards. I arrived first. I sat up at the head of the table. Grace sat to my right with the lease documentation and the renewal proposal. The Calloway Brands team arrived in a group, their office manager, their CFO, their SVP of Operations, a real estate attorney who was new and whom I didn't recognize, and Diane Collier. They came through the door in a cluster, and prenade the cluster and arrayed themselves on the opposite side of the table with the specific coordinated movement of people who had walked into a meeting together and were establishing their position. Diane was looking at her phone when she entered. She looked up when she reached her chair. She saw me. The sequence that followed took approximately 4 seconds and contained more information than most conversations manage in an hour. First, recognition. The specific jolt of encountering a face that the context has made impossible. Second, confusion. The cognitive gap between where her mind had filed me, former employee, past tense, resolved, and what I was doing at the head of this table. Third, recalculation. Faster than I expected, because Diane was not a slow thinker. Her eyes moved to Grace, to the documents on the table, to the building name on the presentation folder at each seat. Callahan-Yoon Property Partners, Callahan 4th. The stillness, the specific motionlessness of someone whose internal architecture has just received information that requires significant structural revision and has paused all external function while the revision is processed. She sat down. She said nothing. I looked at the room, at the CFO with his pen poised, at the SVP with her agenda open, at the real estate attorney who had no idea what had just happened and was waiting professionally for the meeting to begin. Thank you all for coming, I said. I'm Reese Callahan, managing partner of Callahan-Yoon Property Partners. We've been the building's ownership since 23 months ago. We're here to discuss the renewal of your floors, 2 through 4 lease, which comes due in approximately 11 weeks. The CFO nodded. The SVP opened her copy of the renewal proposal. The real estate attorney made a note. Diane Collier sat with her hands folded on the table and looked at the lease document in front of her with the expression of a woman reading a document she has understood is going to tell her something she is not prepared to receive. Her name was nowhere in it. My name was on every page. The proposed terms, Gray said, distributing the renewal proposal, reflect current market conditions for comparable Class A space in this district. We've held the rate below market for the first 23 months as part of our standard relationship building practice with anchor tenants. The renewal reflects a moderate adjustment toward market rate that we believe is fair and well supported by current comparables. The CFO reviewed the numbers. This is reasonable, he said to the SVP. Below what we'd pay to relocate, significantly below. Grace confirmed. The meeting proceeded. I answered questions about the capital improvement schedule, the building's mechanical systems, the amenity package we were expanding in the renewal period. I addressed the real estate attorney's questions about the lease structure with the precision of someone who had written the terms themselves. Throughout, Diane said nothing. At the end of the formal meeting, as the Calloway Brands team was gathering their documents, Diane remained in her chair. The others filtered out. Grace excused herself with the professional timing of someone who understands when a room needs to contract. Diane and I sat on opposite sides of the conference table. 23 months, she said. Yes, I said. You acquired this building while you were working for us. I acquired this building through my property investment partnership. Yes. It was disclosed in my outside business interests filing with HR when the acquisition closed. She was very still. I never read those filings, she said. Most people don't, I said. A silence. The termination, she said, was a business decision, I said. Your words, not personal. She looked at the lease document. And this, she said, is this personal? I thought about how to answer this, honestly. This is a lease renewal meeting, I said. The terms are fair. The proposal is market supported. Grace and I treat every tenant relationship with the same standard regardless of what exists outside of it. I paused. That's not virtue. That's just how we operate. She looked at me for a long moment. You could have told me, she said, at any point, that you owned this building. You could have kept me, I said, at any point. For 7 years of work that both of us know justified it. The silence that followed was the most honest space that had ever existed between us. Not the professional distance of a manager and a direct report, not the managed courtesy of a difficult conversation, but something stripped of both. I made a mistake, she said. 3 words without decoration, I held them. Yes, I said. You did. Is there? She paused. What happens now? I looked at the lease proposal on the table between us. You sign the renewal, I said. You stay in the building. Your team keeps their space. Life continues. I paused. And I go build my next thing. What's your next thing? She said. I thought about the question. Something I don't have to do in my personal time, I said. She was quiet. Then, with the directness of a woman who had spent 17 years in corporate environments and had learned that some things said plainly cost less than the same things said with decoration. You'll be very good at it. I looked at her. I know, I said. The lease was signed 3 weeks later. Standard terms. Market rate. 5-year renewal with 2 extension options. Calloway Brands stayed on floors 2 through 4 of a building they had not known was mine until 11 weeks before their lease expired. They knew now. It changed nothing about the terms. It changed everything about the dynamic. In the specific, invisible way that power shifts when the people who thought they understood a relationship discover they were operating with incomplete information. My departure from Calloway Brands was processed the week after the termination. Severance, COBRA, the administrative completion of 7 years of professional life. I spent the following 6 months building what I had been building in my personal time for the past 4 years, but now in my professional time, with the full focus that the personal time had never been able to offer. Callahan-Yoon Property Partners grew. We acquired 2 more buildings in the 12 months. Following my termination, Grace and I hired our first full-time staff member, a young analyst named Marcus, who reminded me, in his focused curiosity about the intersection of finance and real estate, of myself at 22. I told him, on his first day, what I had been doing for 10 years, while I was also doing something else. He looked at me with the specific expression of someone who has just received a piece of information that is going to reorganize how they think about what is possible. Both at the same time, he said. Both at the same time, I said. until you don't have to anymore. He nodded slowly. And then, he said, I thought about a Tuesday afternoon in September, a one-page letter, an elevator with 2 boxes, a conference room table, and the 4-second sequence on Diane Collier's face. And then, I said, the building speaks for itself. Before you go, I have to ask you this, and I want your real answer in the comments. Should Reese have disclosed the building ownership to Diane before the termination? Or was the lease renewal meeting the perfect ending to the story? Some people say transparency was owed. Others say Diane wrote that ending herself the moment she handed over 1 page. Tell me exactly where you land. I read every single comment. If this story moved something in you, if you have ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea what you were holding, hit that like button so this story finds the people who need it today. Share it with someone who is running 2 tracks right now, building in the quiet hours, doing the work before anyone knows to look. And if you believe that the most powerful thing you can build is something that speaks for itself long after the conversation is over, subscribe. Because every week this channel brings you the stories of women who were handed 1 page and built everything else. You do not want to miss what is coming next week. Your first month of Audible is completely free. Over 500,000 titles waiting in the description below. For the ones running 2 tracks. For the ones who kept building. The link is right there. Use it today.